Welcome to the Production Talk podcast with me, Jan of mixartist.com.au. In this podcast series, we celebrate the modern way of producing music. We want to talk about all things related to songwriting, recording at home, and music production. So if you produce your music at home, this is the place to be. Please subscribe and recommend this podcast to all your friends. This is the Production Talk podcast, episode 61. Welcome back to another episode of the Production Talk podcast. At the beginning of this episode, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the country that we are meeting on today, the Arakwal people of the Bundjalung Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Today is another great interview, and we are continuing a series of talking to phenomenal drummers. Today with us is GERATHY. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks for having me, mate.
How are you today?
I'm very good, thank you. It's the first day of spring and the sun's out.
Yes, it's a phenomenal day. Yeah. It's a lovely place to be here. So thank you so much for making the time to speak to me today. Look, I guess there are lots of people who know you already very well, but there are also overseas listeners and, some in very far places on the earth. To the few who may not know you, can you just quickly introduce yourself? Tell us about the projects that you're currently involved with.
Okay, I'm a freelance drummer. I've been lucky enough to play with a lot of different bands all over the place. Grew up in Sydney, been in the Northern Rivers for about 12 years now, and been lucky enough to play and tour with some of my favourite artists, and still continue as a freelance drummer and do a bit of session work, a bit of live work, a little bit of production, and that's pretty much it.
Can you please drop a couple of names?
Well, I've been lucky enough to tour with Butler trio. Did 5 years with John, and we went around the world, I think 3 times, maybe 4 times.
Wow.
And that was pretty good. Lucky enough to play with Pete Murray occasionally, and Bernard Fanning and Bobby Arlou. I'm the official fill-in for a lot of bands, which is a very good place to be.
Yeah, right. Cool. Yeah. So you played with the John Butler trio for about 5-6 years or something?
About 5 years, yeah.
And do I remember that correctly? Did you replace Nicky Bomba on the drums?
Correct. Yeah.
Wow, he's an animal.
He's an amazing musician. Yeah.
And you took over. Wow, that's fantastic. Look, let's talk about your early days. How did you start as a drummer? Do you play any other instruments? How old were you when you started?
My mum's brother is a drummer, and so it was always around, and Mum encouraged me to play instruments. She bought me a drum kit when I was 10. I played it for a week, and it sat in the corner till I was about 16. And when I was 16, for some reason, I decided to play drums, and within a week, I could pretty much play basic grooves. So it was in there, but I just had to sit down and spend some time. But I always played a little bit of guitar, but, I call it drummer guitar.
Yeah.
I play straight 8th notes with my right hand, and it's pretty much, I got a good right hand from playing hi-hat for 20 years.
Of course.
My left hand's pretty slack.
And you also sing?
Yeah, sing, yeah.
I've seen you sing background.
Yeah, sing background, and I've got a couple of projects where I sing some lead as well too, recording projects, but mainly backgrounds, yeah.
Okay, so as a drummer, how did you get from being, a 16-year-old drummer who had to learn how to hold the sticks to playing world tours with some of the biggest artists in Australia? That's a huge distance you traveled there. How do you get there? What were the milestones? What did you do differently than other drummers?
I think a lot of it was just the amount I got to play. I was lucky enough to grow up in Sydney at a time when there was so many gigs. I played 7 nights a week, and quite often I was playing with musicians who were a lot older than me, and they would see that you sort of had something. They'd be like, "Oh, this guy's solid," and they take you under their wing. And you really learn so much from playing so much with so many older people and so many different styles, from rock, blues, funk, soul. And also, if I wasn't playing, I was watching amazing drummers, people like Gordon Rittmeister, Terapai Richmond. There was Warren Trout. there was just so many great drummers in town, so you knew where you had to get to.
Yeah, right. And then you got, inspirations and you practiced?
Yeah, and it's just the fact that I was playing for 3 hours every night.
Yeah, right.
It just, if you do that many hours, hopefully you get better.
Of course. So in some ways, playing live sort of replaced the traditional practicing at home for you, or is that all happening in addition?
I was never a very serious practice, but very, very serious at practice, but I would always play to records. For the first 10 years, maybe, I was playing to Midnight Oil records and Led Zeppelin records and Beatles records. And,
yeah, right.
And that's still not much different to how I play now. Those drummers they play grooves, they play the song, and they stay out of the way. And I think that's still my biggest sort of influence. Those drummers, Rob Hurst, Ringo, John Bonham,
wow,
Al Jackson Jr., they're all not too dissimilar.
Yeah, right. And tell us about your drum set. What instruments do you play?
I've always played Ludwig, and I've been lucky enough to be a Ludwig endorsee for a little while now.
Wow.
Yeah, they're just... And funny enough, a lot of those drummers that I've mentioned all played Ludwig too.
Yeah.
And my uncle played a Ludwig, and when he passed away, I was lucky enough to buy that actual drum kit off my auntie, and that's my main drum kit, really. It's a 1969 Ludwig, and he took it around the world playing on cruise ships, and then, I haven't actually toured with that one, but it's my main studio kit. So
wow.
It's done a few hours, that one. Nice.
So what's it like to being endorsed? Do you get free stuff, or how does it work practically?
Look, I'm endorsed by Ludwig and Zildjian and Remo, and they've all been really, really good to me. I don't take the mickey at all. If I need something, I get a endorsement rate, but they've all been really good to me. They'll often say, try this out, but more often than not, it's more if I need something, I'm happy to pay for it, but I'm lucky enough to get a discount. And
did you approach them, or did they come to you?
I actually can't remember how it happened.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like maybe a bit of both. Yeah, there's a company, a shop called Drum Tech in Melbourne, and Frank was very helpful with introducing me to some people, and a lot of the companies have similar distributors. So
okay, yeah, that helps, of course.
But the stuff that I'm endorsed for is stuff that I played from the start anyway. So not much changed really.
Yeah, right.
Just
nice.
I got fancier stuff than I had in the beginning. Yeah.
So Zildjian, Remo, and Ludwig, they are my favorite brands.
Yeah.
I always loved Zildjian's. They're fantastic.
They're the ones that work for me. I mean, there's so many different great cymbal manufacturers, but
yes, that's true.
That's a sound I'm used to.
Okay.
It's a sound I know. There's a line of cymbals called Keropes. I think that's how you say it. And that's the sound that I've had in my head my whole life.
I think we worked together once at a pub gig in Billinagil at the Beer Garden.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, that must have been 4 years ago, I can't even say. But that was a relatively small gig, maybe 100 people. So you've played all the events from small gigs like that to the big stages. What difference does it make in your drumming? Do you need to adjust your drumming to the size of the venue? Or is that replaceable? Is it always the same?
In theory, it's the same, but obviously volume's different.
Okay.
And the musicians that you're playing with make a big difference.
Please explain that.
Well, if you've got players who are playing quietly, you can't play louder than them. And if you've got and also just where people sit within the music. If you've got a bass player that's laying back and a guitarist that's pushing, you've got to somehow meet in the middle. You can't. So if I've got a guitarist who's laying back on the backbeat, I'll pull my snare back with them. Just be aware of the surroundings. I feel like a drummer needs to make the band feel better, and you've got to take your own ideas out of the whole equation and just follow what the band's doing. So if a band's sitting on top of a beat like an Aussie rock beat, you got to sit on top of the beat with the band. If everyone's laying back, you can't be in front of them. You got to lay back with them. And so sometimes the venue makes a difference. And sometimes I'll choose different drums because of the venue or the room, which I think most musicians would do. A guitarist would probably adjust their EQ or change the delay setting on their pedal. So it's kind of the same thing.
Wow. Okay. And tell us about stage sound. You probably have played to, any type of stage sound, from phenomenal to probably also crappy on occasions. How do you overcome a bad stage sound? Is that the end of the gig? Does it all fall to pieces for you? Or is there a method to overcome it and still get a good show out of it?
You have to take that out of your head.
Yeah.
And just, you can't use an excuse like bad stage sound to have a poor performance. If you have to play quieter or play louder or use more visual cues, you do what you do to get through.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
I've had sound where it sounds like a record, and I've had gigs where I can't hear the lead singer, but I can see what he's, if the lead singer happens to be playing guitar, I can see what their right hand's doing. And sometimes it's literally a visual thing or playing from memory.
Oh, wow.
And, you can wave your arms at the monitor guy for so long, and then there's a point where you just have to
move on,
look forwards, and
yeah, right.
You're there to do one job.
Oh, that would be terrible, not being able to hear the singer.
It's rare, but it does happen sometimes.
Yeah, you're right.
And sometimes through nobody's fault.
And do you prefer stage monitors or do you prefer in-ear monitoring?
I prefer monitors, but I think I love in-ears for singing because it just puts your voice in your head. And it's also great for the fact if the volume that I've played some gigs, if I didn't have in-ears, I would probably have massive hearing loss because if I'm playing, some of the bigger stages, your dynamic range gets pushed from 5 to 10 rather than 2 to 7, or if you think of it like a scale like that. And so the good thing about in-ears is that you can pick how loud you want them to be. They're working as earplugs as well. And then I don't like it too loud. I like it just comfortable.
Okay.
But I think wedges, quite often I think a band plays better on wedges. I could be wrong, but I feel like you're playing to the environment a little bit more. And I mean, I've been lucky enough to have really good quality in-ears with amazing engineers, and we play well. But there's something about wedges. It's having that air.
Yeah, exactly. The physical energy that you get from it. Huh? Yeah. Okay. And when you work with in-ears, do the engineers feed some of the audience back into your ears to get a bit of a sense of the size of the venue? Or
some engineers do, some don't. It sort of depends. And and sometimes you can feel a little bit isolated in ears, but quite often I'll just pop an ear out a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Because you can you can push them right in if you really need to feel that tightness.
Yeah.
But you can also just sort of let a bit of the outside air in if you need to.
Have you ever been asked to play on a click live?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, right. In this case, you obviously use in-ears so that the click wouldn't bleed? Or,
yeah, that's right.
Or do you use a bass shaker, one of these shakers that you add to a seat?
I've always done it with in-ears, but I'm really not a fan of it. I don't mind if anyone else does it, but me personally, I just hear. I feel like a good band doesn't need a click or track. I think Dave Grohl once said, "Why do you need a track when you got a drummer?"
Yeah,
but certain styles of music, some people do really use it well. But I'm still a big fan of the Rolling Stones and bands like that. They just
classic.
They've been doing it the same way for 50 years, maybe.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. All right, let's talk about studio work for a moment. Obviously, when you work in studios, I guess you've worked in some of the bigger studios. There's always a bit of time pressure.
Yes.
And once time pressure kicks in and everybody's aware that, every minute money is being spent, that can build up a bit of pressure. How do you keep your nerves and how do you stay relaxed in an environment like this? How do you lay down really good takes? How do you get your mind ready to ignore all of this and actually play your heart and soul out?
I think you've just got to stay on top of yourself. like mentally, just listen to what everyone else is doing, and don't think about it. It's pretty easy just to focus on one thing. So if you just got to turn the world off around you,
Okay.
and count it in, and the one job is to get that track right. And sometimes you make mistakes. Sometimes sometimes you can get frustrated, but it's just a matter of, we're lucky that we do it so often that we know where we've got to get to, and we're honest with ourselves. Lucky that a lot of the musicians I play with are all of a similar level, and we just know that we have to get to that finish point.
Okay.
And producers and engineers will have good input and know how to, what's the best way to say it? Know how to guide you.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So just quite practically speaking, have you ever felt the pressure? Have you been frustrated or, annoyed in the studio if things don't go as planned? How do you overcome that? If you notice that it's not the right mindset right now, you're a bit stressed, what do you do now?
Yeah, look, there's been times definitely where people have tried to explain a part to me and somehow it gets lost in translation, or they're speaking one language and I'm speaking another language, and I often say, can you sing it to me? Can you write it out? Can you play it to me? That's probably the only time where it really gets to that point, because you want to give them what they want. And it doesn't matter what it is. If they want a certain thing, I want them to get what they want. That's probably the hardest, most difficult thing sometimes. But you always find a way somehow. Yeah, you just got to be open and level-headed. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Cool. Well, it sounds like you managed quite naturally to do that. So it doesn't seem to be a big effort for you in a studio to, get into the right mindset.
Well, it depends too what sort of sessions you're doing. Most of the sessions I do, people either have a fairly straight idea of what they're after, or they're just like, I want it to sound like the Beatles. Yeah. And they're open to that. Yeah. They're open to my interpretation of whatever they say. So it's different every time, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Does that answer that?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Yes, thanks for that. Let's talk about grooves. So you mentioned earlier that as a 16-year-old, you learned, how to play the drums within a week or so. If we rewind it back to that 16-year-old Grant and you played a simple, 4/4 straight beat, it would probably sound very different to what I would play today. I'm an okay drummer, not good, or what you would play today. But it could be the same notes. Can you explain that to us? What makes a beat actually work really well? Even a simple beat, if played by a good drummer or an experienced drummer like yourself, there's a certain magic about it. What is that?
A lot of it, it's like someone's accent or punctuation in their voice. Like you and I talk very differently, but we're talking the same language. Yeah. So you and I could sit down and play kick on 1 and 3, snare on 2 and 4, and it's going to sound different because we're different size and shape people. We've got different ears. We've got different hands. And you could have a click track going at 120 beats per minute, and technically we're both playing in time with the click, but it's going to feel different. And I don't know what that always is. I tend to push the kick a little bit and pull the snare back a little bit, but not always. And there's also there's so much subtlety in the way that you can play a hi-hat groove. There's difference in the balance. So I tend to hit the kick a bit harder than a lot of other drummers. So that's going to feel slightly different. And it might only be a tiny bit harder, or I'll try to play note length on a kick drum where other people don't. Or I'm aware of the note length when I play a kick drum. So if I'm going, kick, snare, kick, snare, I'm thinking of those kick drums as all being different note lengths. And so there's that. Plus it's just the natural feel that it's like the way I walk or the way I talk.
Can you explain that note length a bit more for me? I'm not sure if I get this. A kick is just a transient and it's got a bit of a sustain. Is that what you mean, the ring of the kick?
Yeah, there is. And even if you put 3 pillows in the kick drum, you still can control the length of the kick a little bit.
Through playing?
Through playing, yeah. And it's something that
How?
I didn't realize I was doing. Just by the way, my foot's sliding up and down the pedal board all the time, but it's also how hard you hit it, how far you let the beater come back.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes you almost hold. I bury the beater, but sometimes it comes off a whisker.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like the snare drum. If you're playing big 2 and 4 with some ghost notes, the 2 and 4 are almost like a quarter note, and then the ghost notes are the divisions of the quarter note of sixteenths or something. And so they're kind of shorter notes. And technically, if you look on a screen, they look the same, but the transients do look a tiny bit different when you're playing, long, short, long, short. It actually does look different on the transients on the computer too.
I've played the drums for many years of my life. I'm not an active drummer anymore, but I've never once thought about note length in that way. That's absolutely mind-opening to me right now. I always assumed that note length is something that guitar players can do and piano players can do to some way, but drummers, well, that's eye-opening.
Well, we're playing with if we're playing the same. Quite often we're playing the same pattern as a bass player. So if with that groove that we're talking about, long, short, long, short. If a bass player is going boom, 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 we've got to match that. And I know we can't technically hold the kick drum for that long, but there is a long note and a short note that you can get out of the same drum.
Okay.
Or the feeling of it too. It could almost also be where it falls within the grid, so to speak.
Yeah, right.
But it's not all staccato.
Yeah, right. Look, later today I'm going to get some time on the drum set and just give that a shot. I've never considered that.
Give it a go.
I would definitely try that.
Think of a classic country, Americana country beat.
Yeah.
They're not all the same length kick drums.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Fantastic. What is the right amount of drum notes for a song? Should it be busier? Should it be minimalistic? How do you know what is too much?
It's how long is a piece of string.
Yeah, of course.
Every song's different.
Yeah.
I've done songs where I play the one groove for the whole song without even a cymbal hit. And then the other day I played on a track and he said open up in the bridge. And I've done more drum fills in that bridge than I've done in songs in the last 20 years. And it sounded great. He sort of said to me, in between the vocal phrasing, I want you to play a triplet, then do something Stuart Copelandish in this section. And when I was playing it, I was like, wow, that's a lot of notes. But listening back, he had a great vision and it sounds really good. So it's not right or wrong. Cool. And there's some players who, someone like David Garibaldi, who is almost playing 16th notes the whole time, but it's the grooviest music you've ever heard. And there's other people who literally, Steve Gadd will play a swing beat and literally just play quarter notes only. And it feels like it's swinging harder than anything you've ever heard. So I don't know what the answer is, but
okay,
I think a good musician will play what's needed for the song.
Yeah, right. So it really depends on what you play into, what the other musicians are doing.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Like Tower of Power, like David Garibaldi and Rocco, they were literally playing 16th notes the whole time, and that's some of the grooviest funk music I've ever heard. Yeah.
Well, I guess not all of these notes are played loud.
Yeah, there's
probably
lots of
quiet
notes.
Yeah. Cool. Wow, that's really cool. Is it different in a studio than live? Do you sometimes play a few more notes live, a bit more energetic, or do you try to really copy the exact performance from the studio when you play a show?
I think once again it depends what the song is, but live songs tend to be faster and louder and busier
and sometimes
and
longer,
more energy. Yeah, and it also depends. If you're playing through a big PA, I was lucky enough to work with a really, really talented engineer, Colin Ellis, and he would just be like, mate, just play quarter notes. When the big stages, that's all you're going to hear. If you play too much, it kind of disappears. And you hear bands like Green Day and I don't know, say Green Day, they've gone from being a sort of garage punk band to a stadium band, and their new songs, they're very, very sparse and simple, but they sound amazing in a stadium.
Yeah, right. So it's sometimes also about the notes you don't play.
Yeah, but the Police were some of Stuart Copeland's stuff was really busy, but
very busy.
It translated. So I don't know.
That's true. That's true.
It's horses for courses, and there's always going to be an exception to the rule.
Yes, definitely. Nice one. I guess, it really depends on what you get back from the other musicians as well. So, if they leave a lot of space, do you sometimes feel like you need to step in and fill it? Or, do you step back when they play busy stuff?
I don't know if it's actually if it's a conscious decision.
Okay.
I think a lot of the time it's so often, like if it's vocals, the vocals will dictate a lot of what's going on.
Yeah.
And the song will dictate. So often you hear a song and you just know how it's going to sound at the end, or you've got a fair idea. It might change, but a lot of songs will just tell you what to play.
Wow. Okay, that's really good. Can you tell us a bit more about your studio work? Do I remember correctly that you're available as a studio drummer, that people can book you?
That's correct, yeah.
And they can send you, let's say, their guide tracks, and then you record drums and send it back online?
Yeah, that's correct. I've got a little setup and I do remote stuff.
Yeah.
And as well as, I can do face-to-face as well.
Fantastic. So do you work from home, or have you got a studio for that?
I have a studio at home. Yeah,
cool.
I was lucky enough to.
Are you happy to share what the studio looks like? What, drums, what gear, what devices one would find in there?
Yeah, it's a tiny room. It's a 90s style house with a 3 meter by 5 meter garage attached to the house, and it's basically that's a small studio, but I've got some reasonably good preamps and reasonably good microphones, and I've learnt how to make the room sound good. A lot of it, you spend a lot of time in a room, you'll know how to play into it, and it's funny, you start hearing reflections or resonant frequencies, and the next thing I know, I'm sticking mattresses on the wall and pillows, and all right, yeah, there's something going on in that right corner, and eventually I build something more permanent. But and playing to the room, you can't.
Yeah, right.
Sometimes some rooms you got to play the cymbals loud. Sometimes you got to play them gently, and But I'm lucky. My small room is quite balanced for what it is.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And when you do remote work, obviously it's hard to communicate about a take and get feedback from your clients. Do you just give them different takes of different energy, or do you get really clear idea? Do you ask a lot of questions up front, or how do you get it right?
I try to find out their vision, and most people these days understand a lot of different instruments. I think it's just the nature of it, because people can get on a program and get Easy Drummer or something like that. They'll often have a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
And they might go, it might be like, just a drum fill into each chorus, or sometimes they'll tell you, I want the drum fill into the chorus to be Pat Boone, Debbie Boone or something like that. But yeah, most people tend to know what they want.
Yeah.
And
okay,
I'll take notes and hopefully get it right.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll come back with edits, and that's cool. Yeah.
And do you cover a range of different genres, or do you specialize in specific styles?
Yeah, I mean, I throw my hand at anything, but I'm not a great jazz drummer. I've done a lot of jazz gigs, but I'm not a jazz drummer. That's something that takes a life. That people commit their life to that style of music, and I love listening to it, love playing it, but it's more the rock, funk, soul, country, Americana stuff that I think I would say I've spent more time doing.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. And when you work at home, you obviously got to operate the recording system, your computer, I guess.
Yes.
And the drums all at once. How does that work for you?
Well, I'm lucky enough. I used to drag the mouse and the, just the Bluetooth mouse and keyboard over to the drum set, but I've even stopped doing that. With Pro Tools, I just do a pre-roll of 8 bars and get there and jump in.
Okay, so it's just a bit of walking forward and back.
Well, it's only a 5 meter long room, so it's
not that bad.
Yeah, it's not so bad.
And then with finding your sound, you probably had to record something, then readjust your input gains, record again until you had the settings right?
Yeah, that's where it takes a bit of time.
Yeah.
And listening to does the snare, does the snare or do the toms fit the key of the song. Sometimes, sometimes it's not important. Oh, I mean, it's always important. But I know there's a guy that I've done some tracks for in Germany, and he's very particular about the pitch of the snare drum to the song. He's like, I don't want it to be the same key as the same pitch as the tonic. He's like, I want it to be a third or a fifth, and I spend a lot of time with him because he knows exactly what he wants.
Yeah, right. And then you tune your snare to a musical pitch.
Yeah, it's not very often I do that.
Yeah,
it's more I'll play and you can just hear the overtones because there's kind of three pitches to a drum. There's like the main fundamental, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah.
And it drops a third or whatever it is. And then there's an overtone. So I guess you just got to listen to all of those. And you feel it when it's wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Nice one. That reminds me of a chat I had with James Lyle about, EDM music.
Yeah.
And he's really big on getting the kick drum and the bass tuned perfectly.
Yeah.
In EDM, it's absolutely critical, but it's actually interesting to see that this even applies to snare drums in different genres.
I did a session when I was maybe 19 with a really, really experienced engineer who happened to be playing keyboards on that session. And I was writing the floor tom with the song. And he said to me, "Oh, Grant, it feels good, mate, but I think the floor tom isn't in tune with the song." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And then once I was aware of that, I was like, "Of course."
Yeah, right.
It's there's a pitch on a floor tom.
Yeah.
And if it's a semitone out from the band, it's like, it gets pretty ugly.
Okay. So how do you do that practically? So you start tuning until it's right, but what if the next song is then in a different key?
Then I'll adjust it. There's little tricks, there's little cheats with drums where you can sometimes drop one lug or even loosen the wires on a snare and it will change the pitch slightly. Depends how close you are. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's another eye-opener for me. I've never understood that at all, how you can tune drums to a pitch. And, when I change the tuning of my kits, that's usually, a couple of hours of a mission to get a drum set tuned. But how do you do it quickly? That's
just time. It's a bit like
to me.
It's a bit like you EQing something. You've done it so many times.
Oh, okay.
I've seen you do it while you're having a conversation. It's so ingrained. Your ears are so tuned to it from years of doing it. But sometimes it takes a minute. Yeah. And some people have better pitch than others. Some people will point out to me, "Hey man, that something weird going on with the tuning of those drums," and I'm like, "Okay," and you trust them.
Yeah, right. And do you then tune the toms in relation to each other? Do you choose intervals deliberately?
Yeah. I generally sort of go 1, 3, 5. But I usually just play 2 toms unless someone asks me, 1 up, 1 down.
Yeah.
But I mean, it all has to be relative to the song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, look, you dropped so many knowledge bombs on me today already. Literally, I learned so much about drumming from you. That is absolutely ridiculous, man. I thought I knew it all, but obviously I don't. That's really, really good. Look, if people wanted to reach out to you and book you for live shows, for studio recordings, where should they go?
If you go to my Instagram, unfortunately my website's down at the moment. It'll be back up soon, but Instagram's the easiest place to find me. My handle is Cruise the Day, Money by Night. But if you type in Grant GERATHY, it'll come up on Instagram. Or my email address is grantdrums@hotmail.com.
Okay, look, I put all of these things into the show notes. So,
appreciate that.
At the end of the episode, just scroll down, click the link, and you'll find Grant. Thank you so much for blowing my mind today.
Thanks, Jan.
Fantastic. Yeah. It's great to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me, mate. It's a great podcast, and I'm stoked to be involved. Thank you, mate.
This was master drummer Grant GERATHY on the Production Talk podcast. Well, I hope you enjoyed this interview just as much as I did. It's quite amazing how much I learned today. So thank you, Grant, for sharing your wisdom with us. If you want to find out more about Grant or listen to his music, go to the show notes and click the links to his website and social channels. And if you enjoyed this episode, please go to your podcast application and give us a review. A 5-star rating would be very, very much appreciated. Thank you so much. If you want to get in touch with me, you can of course visit my website mixartist.com.au, where we offer studio recordings and of course worldwide online mixing for anybody who needs a little bit of help pushing their projects across the finish line. This is all for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Stay tuned. Next week is another very exciting interview coming up. We are going to speak internationally to one of Europe's biggest touring artists. This is all for today. You have a great week. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.